Okay, I want to review a little bit about what we talked about earlier today. So after doing an introduction on the preaching in general, kind of the biblical foundation and introduction of preaching, we talked about the elements of lesson preparation. And we spent a lot of time just talking about preparing your lesson. Again, I think overall, that's such a watered down thing, unfortunately, that sometimes we think, okay, we got our system down and it's functional, but it may not be fantastic. And it can really go to the next level. Or we just kind of whip something together in our mind and we get up and do it. And again, we can get by, but we're not blowing it out like that. We're not really the kind of preacher that's just drawing in the crowds, the orators that are bringing in the Jewish neighbors and stuff like that. And so we really want to make sure that you're not, I want to make sure you're not listening to these things going, okay, I know that, I do that. I'm sure you are, and I'm sure you do, no doubt. But you're looking for things that you go, what can I be better in? And how can I refine this more? How can I maximize this more? How can I excel in this? So we really can not just be preachers, but really be professionals. Wow. Like in a good way. I mean, not just be prophets, but be professionals. And yes, spiritually we're preachers. Spiritually we're prophets. But we're professionals that should handle ourselves professionally. To our church and our guests, our neighbors, everyone goes, man, that guy, he pours himself out. He really leaves it all in the pulpit. He invests. I want to come hear him. I want to bring more people to him. And again, then we got to follow up with people. We got to disciple people. We got to study the Bible with people. I'm not saying this is the end all, but it is the primary thing that we do. Again, you'll impact more people in a shorter period of time through excellent preaching than anything else you do. So in the elements of lesson preparation, talked about invest your time. Spend that time. I hope you're evaluating your schedule and thinking, how can you readjust your schedule? It's going to take serious readjustment to be able to make this emphasis for some of you. And then B, identify your purpose. C, choose a topic. D, create an outline. E, develop the content within each point like that. And then F, to script, to write out the introduction and conclusion. And so those are just great ways to build your lesson, to prepare your lesson week in and week out, whether midweek or Sunday or Bible talk, whatever you're doing. Those are going to basically be the elements of lesson preparation. Tomorrow we're going to get into expository preaching and talk about how we can utilize those same structural tools to build expository sermons. Okay, so we'll apply it to that as I talked about earlier today. Now what I'm going to do, before I go into the second part tonight is going to be Roman numeral 3. That's going to be practicals of lesson presentation. We're going to get into that. But before we do that, I want to give you an example. I've talked about this example from the thought stage to the purpose statement stage, to the title stage, to the point stage and stuff like that, just kind of as a recent one from me that I've developed. And I don't say this saying, look how awesome it is. I don't mean that at all. But I say it to help you see how to build from start to finish a sermon. And some of you have not done that as much as others. Maybe you go, man, I've done more sermons than days you've been alive, brother. Okay, awesome. You know, you are awesome. And I know there's incredible men of God in here like that. But others of you haven't. We have such, different levels of expertise and experience that I want to go through this specific lesson and kind of show you some practicals of the introduction, the conclusion, the development of the points, and then the development of the content within one of the points so you can see exactly what I've been talking about. Okay, does that make sense? So you ready to do that with me here today? So this is the lesson that I've been referring to as Your Heart. Okay, the title is Your Heart. And I'm even going to go through, let me see if this works, I'm going to go through the slides that I use. I'm not going to go through the whole sermon here. I don't want to bore you with that. But I'm going to go through in detail the introduction. And then I'm going to focus on the second point. You can also see the slides and the way I do the slides. And the slides is a whole different thing I'm going to get into in lesson presentation. I'm going to talk really specifically about that. But you can get a glimpse of how I do that. Okay. So after some niceties, here's how I began this sermon. I wanted kind of a launching idea, an introduction. So I began this way. I said, I want to start by asking you to consider the following verses. Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Jeremiah 29:13. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Joel 2:12. Return to me with all your heart. Joel 2:13. Rend me your heart and not your garments. Matthew 18:35. Forgive your brother from your heart. Ephesians 1:18. I pray also that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. In this brief survey of scriptures from Old Testament to New Testament, what theme do you see leap off the scriptural pages in each one of these verses? What is it? Your heart. No doubt, your heart just comes across like that. Your heart is the thing God emphasizes over and over from Old Testament to New Testament. Proverbs 4:23, I think, sums this up very well. When the wisest man on the planet said, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. What a statement. Your heart is the wellspring of life. All the life that flows within you, around you, through you, and from you comes from your heart. Nothing will affect your attitude, permeate your personality, reflect in your relationships, and determine your eternal destiny like your heart. There's no commodity in your possession that's more important or valuable than your heart, or than your car, or than your house, your bank account, your identity, your degree. There's nothing more crucial to the health and future of your soul, your family, your ministry, and your church than your heart. There's nothing God examines more diligently and desires more passionately than your heart. What is God looking for in my heart? What's He looking for in your heart? What's He looking for in our collective hearts as a church, as the ACR? What kind of heart should we strive to have in order to please God and grow the church strong and healthy? There's so many different thoughts we could go in this discussion of your heart. So many different scriptures and visions come to mind. You could do a whole series of just your heart and all the different ways, all the different dimensions that God wants us to give our whole hearts to Him. But if I'm forced to condense it down to one lesson, then there's specifically two dimensions of your heart, my heart, and our collective heart, that I think God is looking for in this church at this time from all of us. The first is this: a fully committed heart. A fully committed heart. Now, I'm not going to go into this. Okay, that would be point number one. I'm going to do as an example the second one. So, fully committed heart, and then I put the scripture up like that. And I've kind of been, I've grown to just kind of like one background that I keep using over and over, so I'm not flooding people with a million different visions. But there's a fully committed heart, and we look at that under point number one, and then we go on to the next point. Sorry, that was another verse in that one. The second point, and I want to focus on this as an example: a wide open heart. A wide open heart. Let me find it here in these notes. So point number two that God is looking for is a wide open heart. In 2 Corinthians 6, verse 11 through 13, Paul says, "We have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. As a fair exchange, I speak as to my children. Open wide your hearts also." We're on page 6, sorry. I changed the order a little bit as I was going through this. 2 Corinthians 6, 11 through 13, page 6 of your notes there. Paul had so many amazing gifts, but forming deep relationships super quickly had to be at the top of his list. I think the reason he got so close so quickly was that he learned how to open wide his heart over and over and over again. In spite of repeated rejections, multiple betrayals, and constant transition, and vast multitudes of people and churches to give to, he just kept opening wide his heart over and over and over again to more and more people. But contrastingly, the Corinthians were not very good at that. For some reason, they were holding back. And they weren't opening wide their heart to Paul and the other leaders that were with him. And so I think about it, what was wrong with them? What kept the Corinthians from opening wide their heart to Paul? Maybe they'd been hurt in the past by friends, families. Maybe they just grew up and they were kind of hurt, and they've learned to draw back because of their hurt. Maybe they've been hurt by church leaders And along comes Paul, and they're like, oh, there's another church leader. I remember the last church leader. Maybe they'd been hurt by other religious leaders. Or maybe they'd heard negative things about Paul. Rumors were afoot, and people had different views and images of Paul. Or maybe they were just skeptical of his love for them. Yeah, you wrote all about love, but, I've never seen you. Well, you blew me off in fellowship. You just walked by me and didn't hug me. Maybe just for whatever reason, they were skeptical of his love for him. Or maybe they're just too busy in their own worlds to give it much thought. So like, who's this? What's the letter? I didn't hear last week's letter. What's going on? Who's this guy? Oh, what's he writing about? So bottom line, maybe they were just relationally lazy, that they just didn't have the bandwidth to open wide part of their heart to this guy they didn't even know. But the bottom line is, they just were not opening wide their hearts to Paul, whereas Paul was opening wide his heart to them. I found myself over the years sometimes being like the Corinthians. Me, personally, just in my nature, I'm an introvert. My wife is an extrovert. She's the kind of person that if she sees a fellowship like this, the longer she's in the fellowship, the stronger she gets and the more she just comes alive. Me, I start off that way in the morning and it just drains out throughout the day. And I've learned to be loving and giving, and I've learned to imitate Jesus and give, but it is a give. Like it is, and I don't mean that you're a give. I mean, it's out of my love for you and my love for God, but my nature, I have to overcome. Any other introverts in here? Okay, yeah, we got some. And sometimes we're afraid to admit that we're introverts, right? We're afraid we think only extroverts can be in the ministry. People are like, brother, you're selfish. Like, no, this is just the way I'm wired. Okay, we're all different. We breed differently. We need both parts. But I'm just kind of naturally that way. But then I went through a really difficult time that exaggerated that weakness. Back in '04, and we all go, oh yeah, I was there too, '04. We all had that weakness. But back in '04, I moved from Denver to St. Louis, and I'd been really hurt in the church in Denver. We'd all been hurt in those years. And I'd been really hurt, and I came back to St. Louis kind of limping. And they offered me a position in the ministry, and I was just fired up to be in a safe place. We'd led the church there many years before, and they wanted me back. So after 5 years in Denver, we went to St. Louis and struggled our way in there. And the guy that was kind of interimly leading the church, and he was going to be my right hand, was this brother named Dan Rice. Anybody know Dan Rice? Maybe some know him or know of him. But Dan and I had the guys that were most negative about me in Denver were his old best friends. And so it was like the 30 people, it wasn't the would-be's, it was like the should-have-beens, but the 30 people in our church that were the most critical to me were the ones that he was most connected with. And so he had a real skeptical eye, and I was like, oh my gosh, coming back to St. Louis, why does he have to be on staff? And I didn't have any history with him. I even asked the board, like, hey, could you guys just consider getting rid of him before I get there? But I did have that thought. I told him that later. And so our relationship was a little rocky off the bat. But then we worked on it, we worked on it. And I saw that the wounds that I experienced started to turn into an open heart towards Dan. And we got this close, trusting relationship. And we built this friendship for the ages. He lived about a mile from me. He's my best friend. We talk to each other on the phone like 3 times a day. Like, I never do that. I don't talk to my wife 3 times a day. I mean, we would just, hey, Dan, what's going on? I just called to say, hey, yeah, how are you? Like, we got really close. His wife and my wife became best friends. My daughter and his daughter became best friends. We're in middle school together. And he was the youth minister for our kids. I mean, it was like, we're just so connected like that. And Dan was like my #1 friend. And then in the middle of the night, he died. His son, who was a teen, called me up, 3 in the morning. I don't know how I answer the phone. I answer the phone. Hey Taylor, what's going on? Hey, I think my dad's having a heart attack. I said, what? Taylor, come on. Sometimes Taylor exaggerates. Why do you think that? He said, well, the paramedics are here and they're putting those things on his chest and they're going, boom, boom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is serious. What hospital? So we raced to the hospital, and I'll never forget it, going in the little back room and meeting with Heidi and Alex and Taylor and sitting down, and they're in tears, and I grab their hands, and right as I say, let's pray, then the doctor walks in and says, we lost him. And it was just this horrific ensuing year. It was like, it was incredible, and God was amazing. You see God work in ways that He doesn't show on a stat sheet and that don't get represented in good news, but you see the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. And I beheld a God that I'd never known before, and the way He comforted us and comforted the church, it was amazing. But I realized something personally through all of this, and the point of the story. I'd opened my heart wide enough to let Dan in, but I'd put all my relational eggs in Dan's basket. He was my best friend and was my everything, but I hadn't opened it wide enough to let others in. But Dan kind of filled up all my needs, Dan and my spouse and my kids. And then Dan was gone. And I looked at this relational deficit. And I thought, man, in that year, as the grief went on, I just started to feel really lonely. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, I should have been open and wide my heart to other people. I should have gotten close to this person. I should have gotten close to that person. And I learned this lesson that, man, you can't just open your heart at a comfortable level. You've got to be fighting to open wide your heart, whatever stage you're at. You can't just say, I'm full. I've reached my bandwidth. You've got to press the limits like Jesus. You see, as the Gospels went on, now he showed them the full extent of his love. You go, wait, wasn't the incarnation the full extent of your love? No, he just kept pushing it to the envelope more and more. How can I love more? How can I open wide my heart more and more? And as Christians, we got to do that. We got to open wide our hearts more and more. That's what Paul was. Paul could go to this church for 3 weeks, like Thessalonica, 3 consecutive Sabbath days, 2 to 4 weeks, and preach a message and be with those people so much that 6 months later, he hears that they're doing well, and he goes, for now I really live because you're standing firm in the Lord. Like, I've not stopped praying for you. I thank God for you. I remember you night and day as I pray for you. You're like, you're only with us a couple weeks. But that's how much you open wide the heart. Then you go, you're writing the same letter to the Philippians. You're writing the same letter to Colossians. You're writing the same letter to the Ephesians. How do you open wide your heart to so many people? He was like Jesus. They took note. He had been like Jesus. He loved like Jesus loved. So must we. So the question is, are you more like Paul or like the Corinthians? Do you give your heart completely, freely, and openly to other people? Or do you approach relationships more cautiously, carefully, cynically, and selfishly? How many deep friends do you have in the church? Really? How many new ones are you working on? Paul knew if they were to grow and thrive as Christians, they had to learn to open wide their hearts to other people. And the same is true to us. The same is true with us. If we don't open wide our hearts, we are not going to thrive as Christians. You've got to open wide your hearts to one another in your family groups. Open wide your hearts in fellowship. Open wide your hearts to your leaders, to future leaders. Open wide your hearts to those who are not like you, different ages, different races, different educations, different professions, different geography, different ministry. Open wide your hearts. Then in here, and for time's sake, I'm not going to go through it, but I just go through a bunch of little practicals. Open wide your hearts to forgive with like a line or two about that. Open wide your heart to offer hospitality. When was the last time you had people in your home? Open wide your hearts to mentor others. Open wide your hearts to be mentored. What areas do you not let yourself get mentored in? Usually there's areas we do allow ourselves to get mentored in, and we go, oh, I'm getting mentored in that. But what area are you keeping off limits? Your purity? Your finances, your parenting, your dating, your outreach, your Bible study. Open wide your heart to confess in. Open wide your heart to study the Bible. Good point there for non-Christians. I throw it out there and lift up some examples of people studying the Bible. And then the action. What can you do this week to open wide your heart to other people? Everybody just write that down. You don't have to write down, but I'm saying that in church. Everybody just write something down. What's one thing you can do this week to open wide your heart to other people? Okay? So then that's that point. So then as I wrap it up, so I've done the first point and the second point, then as I wrap it up, I go back to the introduction. And I close out, put a slide up there, your hearts. Above all else, guard your heart. It's the wellspring of life. All the life that flows within you, around you, through you, and from you comes from your hearts. Nothing will affect your attitude, permeate your personality, reflect in your relationships, and determine your eternal destiny like your heart. There's no commodity in your possession that's more important or valuable than your heart. There's nothing more crucial to the health and future of your soul, your family, your ministry, and your church like your heart. There's nothing God examines more diligently or desires more passionately than your heart. What kind of heart is God looking for in you? What kind of heart is God looking for in you? What kind of heart is God looking for in the Albuquerque Christian Church, in the Fort Collins Christian Church, in the Denver Church of Christ? God is looking for a fully committed heart. And He's looking for a wide open heart. Let's give him those kind of hearts, brothers and sisters, and to God be the glory. Amen. So there's the example of a lesson like that. So you can see in each of these things, okay, that we're going through, and you see your notes that you have right there. Let me close this off. You see in your notes, like let's say go back to page 6. It's kind of weird to like shift. You're still like focused on your heart, okay, a little bit there. And I don't mean just to be, unspiritual. Hopefully you got moved about your heart as well. But when you look down at say at page 7, up at the top, where I ask this question of, I wonder why the Corinthians were not opening wide their hearts. That's where, what you'll find, most people will read through that verse, open wide your heart, but they won't think, why weren't they opening wide their hearts? So when you can do something like that and go, you ever think like why the Corinthians were not opening their heart? Then you go, maybe they were hurt in the past. And then somebody's like, that's me, he's talking to me. Or maybe they were hurt by leaders, like, I was hurt by this leader in Hampton Roads. Oh my gosh, this guy was so hardline. Or maybe they heard negative things about Paul. Yeah, I heard negative things about you. And so I'm preaching this lesson where there's new leadership. And I know that they're some of them are hanging on in their heart to the previous leader. And I want to show them, hey, nobody can ever replace a special part in your heart that previous leader holds. It'll always be there. Nobody wants to take that away. We're just saying, open wide a new part of your heart for the new leader. And then years down the road, there's going to be another leader. Or you'll move. Open wide your heart to them, and as you do that, your heart gets bigger and bigger. And each part, each person has a room in your heart, and your heart expands and swells. That's what we all have to do over the years. But that's where I kind of get into their heads by not even talking about them. We're just talking about the Corinthians. But it's a disarming way to get people to start thinking about themselves. So you're kind of like easing yourself in. Then I share personally how I've been like the Corinthians. So then they go, wow, I can relate to what John's saying. Then you bring it back to them. Are you more like Paul or the Corinthians? There's very few that at that point just go, I'm much more like Paul. I mean, you're going to see elements of the Corinthians in them. And so then, you talk about how how we got to thrive. And then I go through the practicals. Forgive, hospitality, mentoring, all this kind of stuff. And then actually, what's one thing you can do this week to open wide your heart? And then the conclusion is the same exact, it's cut and pasted from the introduction. But it makes a nice bookend, and they go, yeah, your heart. That is the focus. You ask somebody, what did John preach about when he came to Albuquerque back in March? They're going to go, your heart. They're just going to know that because it really sinks in. That's what happens when you put a handle on it, you have a catchy theme. The points are all mutually exclusive, but they tie back into the title. They're developed. There's personal sharing. There's illustrations with it. When it's developed like that, it sticks. It's biblically deep. It's sound. It's practical. And they can run with it. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's just an example of kind of everything that we've been talking about here in the elements of lesson preparation. All right? Okay, any questions about that or about this lesson, elements of lesson preparation? Let's don't go on to questions about the stuff tomorrow or later tonight. But anything about anything we just covered? If not, I'm going to go on to an exercise that I have for us. Okay, we're good? Okay, here's the exercise. I want you to take out a lesson that you've prepared recently. Maybe you have it in your mind because you don't have your notebook or something like that. But take it out at least in your mind. Or if you have a laptop or something, take it out in your laptop. Something that you've done recently. And I want you to evaluate it based on the elements of lesson preparation that we've talked about. Now don't take out someone else's lesson. Okay, that's not fair. Let's all look at, Ed's lesson last week. Okay, we don't want to do that. So you want to look at your lesson. Okay, take out something you've done. It could be a communion talk. It could be anything like that. Or something you remember from the way past. And I want you to ask yourself, how can you improve the title, the intro, the conclusion, or the point development? The points themselves, or the development within each point? Okay? So you look at it. I know you can't do all that right here and now, but I'm just give us a little bit of like chair work, okay? A little quiet time work. That right now, just look and go, what could you do? What's something you can do? And we're only going to have a few minutes to do this. Something you can do to improve it in its elements of lesson preparation. Make sense? Questions about the assignment? Okay, go.